This is the ninth video of our great book series, and this is Chronology of the World from the Big Bang to the Modern Times by Isaac Asimov, an extraordinary book. And today our heading is 4000 to 3500 BC. Maybe we'll have many videos under this heading, and the subheading is Sumeria. So, what happened in Sumeria between 4000 to 3500 BC? And I see history as a endless stories, wonderful endless stories. So just listen to that in that spirit. When copper was obtained from ore, it meant that there was much greater supply. It meant that there was much greater supply for ornamentation, beauty. But it was not at first very useful as a material for tools. At first, it was not like that. This might well have seemed disappointing to early metallurgists. After all, if a sharp edged piece of rock blunted its edge, that edge cannot be restored without laborious chipping. More likely, the rock tool has to be discarded and a new one must be shaped. If a sharp edged piece of copper is blunt, however, it can simply and easily be beaten sharp again. Simple point. So if your copper cannot be if it becomes blunt, it can't be made sharp again easily. But copper can be made. That's why they were disappointed. The difficulty however, that while stone was hard and might survive quite a long period of use with care without being blunted, copper was much softer, and every minor use bent and blunted it. So every time you had to sharpen it, almost like a pencil. Not all copper seemed to be the same, however. Copper obtained from some ores was harder than from others. Yeah, see. The reason was that copper ore is not necessarily pure. It might be mixed with rocks that, on being heated, released another substance that would mix with copper to form what is called an alloy, ALLOY. At first, such mixtures consisted of copper mixed with arsenic. But arsenic is poisonous, and people who worked with it fell sick. Such mixed ores were abandoned. Therefore, uh, and this was maybe the first known case in which worker safety was a factor in technology. Fortunately, another type of ore mixture was discovered that also resulted in the forming of hard copper. In this case, it was the use of tin ore that did the trick. And the hard copper was actually a copper tin alloy. The alloy was called bronze, possibly from a Persian word for copper. Bronze was hard enough to compete with rock, could hold an edge better, and could be beaten back into shape if necessary. So it became such a powerful thing. The Sumerians began to use bronze tools. And about 3500 BC entered the Bronze Age. To be sure, bronze was used sparingly at first, and stone continued to be the most common material for tools. As a result, the early centuries of the Bronze Age are sometimes called Chalcolithic Age, which is Greek for Copper Stone Age. Another enormous advance introduced by the clever Sumerians. Clever Sumerians was the wheel. Its first use may possibly have been as the potter's wheel. Potter's wheel. In making pottery, clay was, to begin with, molded into shape by hand, with the result that the shape was not necessarily smooth or symmetrical. The pots were likely to be ugly and wobbly. Someone in the Mideast, however, had the inspiration of setting the clay on a flat rock, with a depression at the center of the lower surface that might pivot on a projection beneath and be set to turning rapidly. We have seen that potter's wheel. If a blob of clay is set on the flat rock, A touch of the hand would produce a smooth. They they move it and then see the invention, and they mold the clay. A touch of the hand would produce a smooth and symmetrical curve. Making use of a potter's wheel produced beautiful pottery in far less time than anything produced by hand. The existence of the potter's wheel made it possible made it possible to see a way of simplifying transport. It's turned civilization, I think. Uh, it was all it was always possible to pile objects on some sort of wooden sledge and then drag it along the ground. That meant that most of the work done was simply spent in overcoming the friction that resisted the drag, right? How clearly is explained. Even the use of oxen rather than men could not make it anything but a slow and arduous, beautiful word that is very, very difficult, arduous labor. It could be made easier. It could be made easier if crude rollers such as wooden logs were placed under the sledge wheel. The rollers turned rather than dragged, and that cut down on friction considerably. That's true also, rolling friction we call it. However, rollers had to be picked up from the back and put down again in front, and that quickly grew tiresome. The use of wheels at the ends of two axles, one front and one back, suspended from leather straps that were attached to the sledge, might allow the sledge to roll while the wheels always remained attached. About 3500 BC, animal drawn wheeled carts were in use in Sumeria. The Sumerians also began to use oars, to propel ships against the Euphrates current when the wind refused to cooperate. Instead of simply digging little holes in the soil and dropping seeds into the ground, the Sumerians began to use plows dragged by donkeys oxen. These had a sharp edge that scraped up the soil, loosening and aerating it. Seeds which could be scattered through the loose soil then grew more easily and rapidly. These were the advances that happened in Sumeria. In the next video, we'll see a subheading of this chapter. This happened between 4000 to 3500 BC, where the chronology is given the history with facts. The next subheading is Egypt. Thank you so much.